Hey guys, about 2 years ago I got myself a pair of Audioengine A2 speakers. And since that day I've had really positive comments about how great they look whenever I posted pictures of my setup online. There's a thing about these small speakers with a minimalistic design and great finish that really catches the eye. And they're part of a really specific category of speakers where you get a lot of power in a small form factor without the need of a subwoofer. But I know of a really good contender to these, and that's the Kanto YU2 Speakers. And shoutouts to Kanto for reaching out and sending these in. These are actually $50 cheaper than the Audioengines, making them a really compelling option if you're in the market for a speaker like these. So in today's video, I'll show you what these are all about, and we'll try to see which pair is a better fit depending on your needs. So let's start with the unboxing. These speakers come well packed in their box alongside all the accessories. You get a power supply, a USB cable, speaker wire to connect the speakers together, and an auxiliary cable. As you can tell, I got these speakers in the matte black finish, but Kanto has close to 10 finish options I think, so you can really get a color that will match your setup. And physically, these speakers look real good. At the front you get a small 2.75-inch woofer and a 3/4-inch tweeter. And at the back you also get a bass port. In terms of I/O, the right speaker is only a simple cabinet. It has the connectors for an amp, but that's it. All the magic happens in the left speaker. This one also has an LED at the front to let you know if the speakers are on. And at the back, you get a rotary knob for the volume. It also doubles as the on-off switch with a click when you completely turn counterclockwise the knob. There's the speaker connectors for the right speaker. So with these, the amp is inside the left speaker and it's powering the right speaker from there. Then there's an auxiliary port if you want to connect these directly to a PC or a phone. It could also be used to connect a Chromecast audio or a Bluetooth receiver. And you also get a USB port to connect the built-in DAC to your computer. That way you can bypass your sound card for the digital to analog conversion. And most mid-range to higher-end motherboard nowadays have pretty good onboard sound, but that's not the case every time, so that's a good way to get a great sound quality whatever computer you have. And finally, there's a subwoofer output and a power input for the power supply. Now that's all great, but how do they compare against the Audioengine A2 Well, the design, features, and port selection are almost the same with both speaker sets. I mean, they're almost the same size, the Audioengines being slightly larger. The bass port is at the front on the Audioengines instead of at the back, and you don't get an LED light for the power status. The woofers and tweeters are exactly the same size, although that's not what's advertised, and you get a pair of RCA inputs and outputs on the Audioengines on top of the auxiliary connector. But both have a built-in DAC, amp in the left speaker, external power brick, and a knob for the volume and power. I'd say the knobs and connectors seem of a slightly better quality on the A2 or at least better looking, but I don't see one or the other breaking anytime soon. But what about this sound? The Audioengines are 30 watt RMS in total instead of 50 for the Kantos, although I wouldn't go over half volume with both pairs in a small room. Kanto mentions that their U2s can go down to 80 Hz while the Audioengines will go a bit lower at 65 Hz. And I will have a little sound comparison later, not a scientific test at all, but it can give you an idea. But here's how I would compare their sound against each other. The Audioengines do go lower. They have more bass in general and can hit lower notes. However, I think they're pushing a little over their limit. The extra bass they produce is not even at all frequencies, and this results in some low frequencies being quite louder than others. Overall, the bass response is pleasing for the size of the speakers, but I wouldn't call it balanced. On the other hand, the U2s have a higher cutoff. They definitely have less low end to them, but they somewhat sound more balanced. The cutoff seems more calculated, and the speakers are not pushing out frequencies out of their physical limit. So the sound can be less enjoyable in some tracks as there's less bass, but the bass response feels more controlled. The Audioengine seems to have more mid-bass too, and the highs are a bit boosted as well. Pretty much sound like a V-shape on an equalizer, but with a cutoff at lower frequencies. On the other hand, the Kantos seem a little more linear, but with a slight boost in the high mids. But in both cases, you get quite a similar sound signature just by the speaker's design and the size of the woofers. Their cabinets are both made out of MDF and they share similar drivers too, so they both have a quieter bass response and an overall boost in mid frequencies. Both would benefit from a subwoofer for the lower frequencies, but that can be fixed with the Sub 6 by Kanto, which I've owned for the last months. I initially bought it to complement my Audioengines, but it definitely is a perfect match for the U2s. It has a crossover and a volume control which lets you match it perfectly to your speaker's bass cutoff and power. The only odd thing is that it has a stereo input while the matching Kanto U2s only have a mono sub output, while the Audioengines do have a stereo sub output. But overall, I think the sub is a better match for the Kantos, as they really cut off the bass compared to the Audioengines. That way, all the lower frequencies are handled by the sub, whereas with the Audioengines, there are some frequencies that are played by both the speakers and the sub for a proper bass coverage. But now, I'll leave you to some audio tests to make up your mind. Just to clarify a few things, I'll have 4 tracks played by both speaker sets, with and without the Kanto Sub 6 subwoofer. Both pairs are connected over USB, so the built-in DACs are used. The sub's crossover is set at 80 Hz and the volume is just a little over half. And I plugged the sub with a mono RCA cable both times, even though the Audioengines have a stereo sub output, so that might explain why the sub is quieter with the Audioengines, or they might have just a lower sub output. The sound is recorded using a Tascam DR05 portable recorder in stereo. And finally, keep in mind that the sub is on the table to be better captured, but in real life it would sound better if it was on the floor. Now, although this is not a scientific test at all and my room has a lot of echo, I hope it can give you a better idea. And I think we can still observe the audio characteristics I mentioned earlier. The A2 Pluses alone do have more bass and a V-shaped kind of sound, but the U2s do seem a bit more controlled. And the Kanto Sub-6 is a really good subwoofer that matches well both pairs, but it's a surprisingly good match with the U2s. So in conclusion, which should you buy? If you don't want a subwoofer and want speakers that have a nice but not necessarily perfectly accurate sound, then I would lean over the Audioengine A2 Pluses. They do produce a tad of mid-bass, which doesn't fit perfectly a subwoofer, so you might need to use an external crossover if you go that route. On the other hand, if you want speakers that are a bit more neutral sounding, then the Kanto YU2s would be better. Their bass response, while being quieter, is more controlled, which would be better for audio work as an example. Although I would recommend studio monitors for that exact purpose. And if you plan on getting a subwoofer someday, these would be better as they leave more room for the sub to do its job. The Audioengines retail for $250 while the Kantos are $200 in the US, so I would really go with the ones that fit your needs as the price difference is kind of negligible. But if you're in Canada, then the price difference is closer to $100, so then the price could be a deciding factor too. Now thanks again to Kanto for this collaboration, and from now on my Audioengines will retire and be replaced by the Kanto YU2s, as I find them to be a better fit with my Kanto Sub-6 subwoofer, both in terms of look and sound. I also plan on mounting my Sub-6 under my desk, and I might make a video about it, so stay tuned for that. And I'll have affiliate links to both speaker pairs in the description, so feel free to check them out if you're interested and want to support the channel at the same time. So hope you guys enjoyed, make sure you liked the video if you did, and if you didn't, just let me know what I should change down in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to subscribe if you still haven't already, as I'll see you in the next video.